when I discussed it with the other members of the GFL that I was going to interview you, so we had a lot of questions coming in from them. So we actually have two questions from my friend Tamanna, who is a very ardent supporter of feminism, and she firstly wants to ask you about how will feminism be able to deepen its roots in the Indian society where misinterpretation of information and blind belief is prevalent?
Excellent question from Damana. Thank you for asking that. So here's one thing. If you think something is going to change overnight, it's not. And I think part of the issue is frustration that things don't change overnight. What you can do, there's a phrase, leopard never changes its spots. Generations do change. So there is a generational stereotype. So we all know this. It doesn't matter how modern our families are. We know that there will be some dadi or some aita out there somewhere, some auntie, who is going to have a very different old school, as we like to call it, viewpoint, right? In Indian culture, we respect that viewpoint because there are elders. Doesn't mean you have to agree with that viewpoint. You just have to respect and understand that they have their viewpoint, similar to how I talk about empathy. Understand that they're coming from a different school of thought, a different generation. They may have their reasons for believing in that. So I think the first thing is not to lose hope or patience when you have somebody from the older generation speak in a certain way. What you can do is educate. We are educators. We are the change makers. We are the grassroots of the future. It's our job to educate, but not in an angry way. Remember this, if you are going in to an angry situation, you're having an argument with someone, just say, well, the two people are already angry and you're trying to diffuse the situation. If you diffuse, do you go in and you tell the person that you're trying to diffuse that you're wrong because of this and that? Probably not, because they're going to get angrier and things are going to escalate. What you do is you try to be calm. You go in and you actually appease that other person. Say, you know what? Thank you for stating your point of view. I actually agree with some of what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from. Let's take a step back. Let's try to think about it now. So you try to agree with them to start with, to understand their viewpoint. Don't have to agree with their thought, but you understand why they're angry. You understand why they're feeling riled up. Because by understanding, you increase that sense of belonging. It's the same kind of thing here. When you're trying to change someone's viewpoint, and the change maker, you have to understand where they're coming from. Why do they think that way? Similarly, then you start talking about in a calm way about your viewpoint and how things have changed. We know generations change. You know, I'm going to say my parents' generation, they had a lot of culture shocks with mine. I have now two small children and I'm thinking with them as well, like, wow, what's going on here? Or their taste of music, or everything's on a device these days, you know? So it's things like that. It's about understanding we are all, if we try to blame someone else, point the finger at yourself first, because there's always something in yourself that you also need to acknowledge. The other thing is when you are listening to somebody else, when you are having a conversation, a discussion about feminism, about someone from the older generation, always understand that they know something that you don't. Don't always think they're wrong or they're right or you know more than them. Always know that who the person you speak to always knows something that you don't when you go into any conversation. So I think to Damana's point there, when we try to change society, to change things, it's one person at a time. It's one viewpoint at a time. But remember, you start with a low-hanging fruit first. Low-hanging fruit, someone who's closer to your generation, someone who may be more likely to understand there are different viewpoints, someone who shows empathy. You know, generations turn over time. We know that the older generation is going to turn at some point. We're going to have different folks coming in. But the sphere of influence is going to be going to the younger and younger generation over time. It's that sphere of influence that we should be focusing our efforts on.
And a follow-up to that question, how do you think the true essence of feminism can be realized?
So again, it depends who you talk to. For me, feminism, again, is going towards gender equality and making sure that we, as women, can do what we want to do when we want to do it. It's almost like a understanding and feeling able to do these things. But other people would say feminism might mean something different. So for my definition of feminism, it's almost like we all have a part to play in this role. It's educating others, is what I've just described in Tamana's question. But for the next question, I would say it's about understanding that we all have a role. We should all take acknowledgement for this. You know, how are we coming across? How are we speaking to others about issues? Are we going with aggression? Remember, if you're aggressive, it breeds aggression. If you're going into an argument and you're talking about men are bad, women are good, and you're expecting the man or someone else to change their viewpoint, it's not going to happen because you've just going to aggravate them further and you've just gone into the stereotype like, oh, look at these feminists, they're trying to put men down again, rather than acknowledging where people are coming from and saying, you know, have you thought about it this way? Have you thought that actually, if I were to go into a problem this way and solve it this way, this is what would happen. Look at the research, look at the stats. When women get involved, what happens? If you go in from a more of an understanding, educated, data-driven perspective, I always say you get more things done. Calm, understand others, acknowledge what they said, and then give your viewpoint as well. So that's my view of how the modern day feminism can actually get things done. So it's more in the traditional sphere.
That was very insightful. What's your opinion on a proposed 50% reservation for women in the Indian Parliament? So currently we have had a lot of states which are reserving seats for women in legislatures, like talking about my state, Odisha. So we have 50% of the seats in the local self-government bodies reserved for women, and 1/3 of seats in the legislative assembly reserved. So how do you perceive this?
But here's the thing. I think it's a great initiative, because what it's trying to do is trying to mandate equality. However, the way it's done has to be very thought out well. Here's the reason why. So for example, I'll give you an example from the West. And in the West, I'll give you an example. So, and this is not women necessarily, it could be a board in a company in the US. And that board wants to hire new directors to look at the advisory board. And they think, you know what, we have 10 white men currently, we want to change the board, we want to give 5 seats, or we want to hire 2 women and 2 people of color, so that at least it's almost 50-50, right? If they're looking for those 10 white men, they'll probably interview about at least 100, maybe 200, 300 people for that role. They'll go here, there, everywhere, and they're going to interview. They're looking for that 2 women. They might just interview 2 women. They might think, who knows a woman? Oh, okay, the first person that comes along, the second. Similarly, the people of color, they might just interview the 2 people, maybe 3 for the role. And then what happens over time is they get a bad reputation. They're like, you know what, we've opened up the thing for these women or these people of color, and they're just not performing. And you know what, I probably would agree with them. I think, and of course they're not going to perform, because you've only interviewed 2 people for 2 roles. Did you go out? Did you search everywhere? Where are the 100 resumes for these 2 women? Where are the 500 resumes for these 2 people of color? You know, it's the same thing. You're going to get your bad reputation. Don't use just women as an excuse for saying we don't have good quality. You haven't done the job of going and finding the quality. So great idea to have 50% women, but do the same amount of research, still go out there, still make the same amount of effort to find those women. Don't just find the first people that come in and just give them the role, because that is going to totally lead into the stereotype, and you're going to get lower quality. You want to be competitive in the process like you would with anything else. That's where the equality comes in. You see?
Yeah, don't just turn them into symbolic figureheads, because again, like I've seen that happen in this country with caste groups. So like like a lot of the people for whom the reservation was there, they aren't exactly benefiting, but we still have leaders from their caste who are joining the legislature, and like the demands for the reservations are increasing. So at a point of time, the other castes, they are getting conflicted, and that's sort of just worsening the situation further. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And again, like we need to understand a lot of things out there. We just can't generalize the performance of a few people and blame the entire community or the entire group.
Exactly.
With that, could you tell us the idea behind UMA, its organization and chapters, and how can we engage with it?
Great. Yeah, so UMA, I mean, you can see my background. I have my company, I'm in New York right now, so we have the New York City in the background right now. So, so UMA really I set up because of my life's journey. It's a reflection of everything I do in my life, my professional and personal life. And I set up my company about 5.5 years ago, really as an empowerment platform for women and minorities to gain confidence, to gain sort of strategies for success and leadership and resilience. And I specifically focused on those elements because that's what I was seeing myself when I took some time out of the paid workforce, when I raised my 2 children. I came out of a finance career, as you mentioned in my intro. I did a decade in finance, and then I transitioned into the pharmaceutical industry. But I got to tell you, the hardest I'd ever worked in my entire life was during my 3.5, 4 years off to raise my 2 children. I was building up skills that I did not even build in the paid workforce. Communication. You know, I'll tell you one example, Omkaar. I thought I was a pretty good communicator. I thought, yes, I can present in front of a room of people. I can write well. But then I realized that communication wasn't just that. Communication is empathy, it's listening, it's the ability to read the room, and it transcends language, it transcends accents. when you have these two babies, they can't talk when they're babies, but you have to understand what they need, what they want, just by their cries, the way they look, the way they sit. It's the same about other things in life. When you walk into a room of different cultures, different communities, reading the room, understanding that human connection is first and foremost. And that is something I specifically learned as a full-time mother when I wasn't in the paid workforce. So these are sort of things as an examples that can hinder people's confidence. When you've taken time off from anything, you doubt yourself. When you have self-doubt, that's one thing that it's hard to get out of that. But you are the only person that can get out of that self-doubt. You are the only person that can build that inner confidence. So I set up UMA because of that. You know, I wanted to work with individuals to really coach and mentor them, to help them get that inner confidence, that self-belief, that step in there in the right direction. But I also wanted to work with companies on what is the diversity inclusion strategy. What are they doing to help that sense of belonging, build up that community? So it's not just stereo picking people just because of a certain statistic, but because they really want to do something about it, and how do they grow these people's careers. So that's a big part of what UMA does. I do a lot of speaking as a result of UMA, where I get invited to speak on forums around the world as well. And UMA is headquartered in New York. To answer your question, we have folks in London, we have in the west coast of the US, San Francisco, California, and in India as well. We have some folks. I think ways of getting involved is sort of helping with our mission to build confidence, helping with our mission. If you want to build confidence, if you feel strongly about helping that inner soul and give back to communities and society, also, if you have those contacts with companies that you know can benefit from our help, that's a great way of getting involved as well.
That was well, edit that part out.
Okay, sure.
So that's a great mission, and again, my best wishes in your endeavor. And I believe the example that you gave in regards to how your motherhood was the most, like, I would say, challenging and sort of difficult period of your professional life and your personal life as well. That should be an eye opener for all those people who underestimate the role of their mothers. And in fact,
Totally.
my mom sometimes jokes like she should be awarded a PhD in human resource management because of raising me, and like I am her MBA project. Like she jokes about that.
Absolutely. And I don't even call that a joke. That is actually very real. An expert when it comes to human encounters. And I joke all the time that, you know, I gave the example of you become a better communicator, you become a better negotiator. If you can negotiate with a toddler or an adolescent later in life, which a mother does so well, take that conviction to your next job interview or your next boardroom pitch. So it's little things like that. You are building skills that are lifelong skills that are very relevant and put you really strongly placed in the paid workforce later on. And yet there is that disconnect that is there.
What does the theme of your book, The Goddess of Go-Getting, address, and where can we get a copy of the same once it's out?
Gosh, thanks for asking. So The Goddess of Go-Getting, it's on soft launch right now. Official launch is available on International Women's Day, so the 8th of March. It is going to be launched by the Consulate General of India in New York. So Mr. Randir Jaiswal, our Consul General of India, is going to be launching the book, and I'm very excited about that. And really, the book is an amalgamation of my life's journey. I have personal stories, I have my professional stories there. Ultimately, it's a book about empowerment, but it's not just an empowerment book. It's a book for workplace and culture, but it's not just about that. It's about leadership and what you can do better as a manager, but it's just not only about that. It's a book for everyone. It's about society, it's about policy, it's about feeling, it's about understanding different viewpoints. It's a combination of, Omkaar, when I started writing this book about 2 years ago now, I started writing off thinking this is going to be a business book. You know, let me write my business stories down and that. And then as I started writing, I quickly found out that I was writing about more like a memoir style. It was more my personal stories. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'll change it to a memoir. Then I realized that it couldn't be one or the other. I couldn't write about my professional story without delving into my personal journey because it shaped who I am. Similarly, I couldn't just talk about my personal story without my professional because it was merged into who I am as well. So that's why this is a book. It's really a book for everyone. It talks about diversity, inclusion. It talks about my story of belonging, about changing society. It's like that. I would love you to read it. I would love others to read it too. You can get it in all major online retailers, Barnes and Nobles, Apple, Amazon. You can go even look for the link right now on Amazon, just search by my name or search by the Goddess of Go-Getting. And it's available as a Kindle, ebook, paperback and hardbook as well.
That would be great. And for the convenience of our viewers, we could have the link to the book put once it's released.
Sure, great.
And also for the viewers, you could check out the Instagram handle of the Global Federal League, as well as Uma and Rita ma'am's handle for further updates on the book.
Absolutely. Thank you.
The pleasure is ours. It's great to to know about the thing, and that sounds really exciting. Because what happens is mostly writers, they tend to conform to a particular genre, or like the book becomes too monotonous at a point of time. But this seems like a potpourri of personal anecdotes, professional tips and suggestions. So a must read, I believe.
Thank you. And also the other thing I did was, because I've read a lot of books and I've co-authored books in the past as well. But the style of my writing, I wrote it as though I was talking to my kids. I wrote it as though I was giving a talk to somebody, because I studied English literature. So I could very easily have written it with a very literate sort of way, but I didn't. I wrote it in a way that is relatable to everybody. And I did that on purpose because this is a book for all. And I wanted it to be simple because it is simple. The concepts I talk about, the rest of the world for years have been talking about in different ways, but it's complicated. It doesn't need to be. Everything I talk about are just very simple things of life, really. And that's why I made it simple on purpose.
That's great. How do you perceive the migration caused due to globalization, and how restricted in your opinion, should transnational migration be?
So, we are all global citizens. I've lived, worked, and been to different countries around the world. For me, the fact that people get to migrate and emigrate and immigrate is beautiful. I love that. It's the only way we get to learn about other cultures. It's the only way we can cross-pollinate, so to speak. It's the only way for business as well. You become a better business person by looking at different cultures, by looking at different stories and different things like that as well. So I think, folks, that people are moving around, they're setting up shop, they're changing and discussing ideas and collaborating. That's what the world is about. This is what we need to do more of.
Where do you see the movement in the next 5 to 10 years, and by when can we expect a global democracy? This is a question I ask to every other world federalist I come across.
You know what? I would love to click my fingers and it's there. But I think, as I mentioned with some of the other concepts, like whether it's gender equality, whether it's racial relations, these are things that you can't just click your fingers. It's mindsets. It's changing over time. There's generational, there's political, there's societal. There are so many different facets involved. But everything is becoming more uniform. One thing you might have noticed is one big part of globalization happened accelerated in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. When lockdown happened, rather than stop people getting together, we got together more. Platforms such as Zoom, other sort of web media, people were talking to people in other parts of the world. You're looking at different time zones. People would wear their national dresses on these different calls. We would learn so much more that we weren't learning actually before the lockdown. So in a way, when people think, gosh, we've been shut down, this is happening, we kind of cut time. In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no, we've gone out. So I think it's just a matter of time where this is going to be the norm, where cross-pollinating, exchanging ideas and stories and these collaborations is going to be the norm. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of patience.
It would be interesting to see the journey ahead, and all of us, we just have to keep on working on in regards to what we are currently doing, and hopefully we'll reach to a peaceful resolution of our contemporary global problems.
Yeah.
Now, here comes a personal disappointment of mine. India is an amalgamation of different cultures, as we discussed previously, and each of its states is large enough demographically and geographically to be an independent nation. And yet India stays united. Among the founding fathers of India, Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi have been supporters of world federalism. And we as a country, we have spearheaded the non-alignment movement, and we are still known for a balanced diplomacy. But despite all of this, why isn't India the epicenter of the movement currently? And why do we still find the movement substantially more active in Europe and the West?
Different cultures have different ways of doing things and being. When the British were in India, things were done a certain way. the school system is still very much British in some ways. So that is still there in some ways. So you're going to still see, looking around, that a lot of the influence is because of the other countries. So there is European influence without even thinking about it. The road system, driving on the same side of the road as you do in the UK, it's all there. The infrastructure, the electricals, a lot of things there, the way schools for English medium schools that are still there, a lot of it is still on the very much British system. So you do have that European, that UK influence. It is still there. It can be taken for granted. What I think about, something to know, is that, remember India, we have so many different states together. There is a lot less fighting between the different states compared to in Europe and other places. Look at that. You see? Yeah. In a way, it's a blessing. It's a curse and a blessing at the same time. You think you have a bit more, people would argue a bit more disorganized and whatnot, but there's a lot more going on because of that. The people are closer as of that. When you think about progress in the world, there's financial progress, there's economic progress, there's political progress. There's also people, culture. People from all over the world, the West, come to India to soak up that culture. When people leave, one thing they always say, they feel the love. When every time I go back to India, go back home, to go back to Assam, I leave and I think I just feel devoid, like, gosh, it's like I left a part of my heart behind. And it's because of that love you get that you do not see in the same way around the world. But you do in our India.
And like that's a very positive part about India, and I think that makes India tailor-made to be an important hub of the movement. But currently, I see like most of it is concentrated in the West, so that's always fascinated me. Like, why not India? Why didn't we exactly take that up seriously?
Yeah, so I mean, it's happening in some places. You have in the West, Ahmedabad, Gujarat, you have different states that are really there on the business front. The ones that think more commercially, that think in export-import businesses, are the ones that you're describing by Omkaar, but that's not everywhere right now. It's coming slowly, it's shifting, but there's a big shift. The minute you commercialize, you lose some of the cultural aspect. You see, if you go from one state to another, it's very different. If you go from Assam and you end up in Gujarat, very, very different. Guwahati versus Ahmedabad, very different, and the rate of progress, the rate of business is very different accordingly, So I think depends what you're comparing and where you want. There is definitely the Western influence. I would argue that, there are some of the most successful folks, even more so than some folks in the West, in the East, in certain areas. So it can be done, and we've seen it, but it's not uniform yet, right? Converting a mindset means not just a mindset, but what are people going to do? Job creation. Some people are happy doing what they're doing. So it's just a slower change, but it's happening. As folks graduate now, people of your age, Omkaar, as they graduate, they're not just staying in the state they were born in. People are moving out. That didn't happen as much in my parents' day. Or my parents just left the country eventually. But you know what I mean? It's like almost like, people usually stayed there and then they just did what their parents did. They might have got educated, but they get educated to run their business or carry on the profession that is in their family. But that was it. They didn't think outside that. But now platform is being available to think outside. Everybody has access to digital media. Everyone has YouTube and Google now. Things are changing. It's going to take time, but things are changing.
Absolutely. And certainly food for thought. Thanks a lot for addressing this personal doubt of mine. With that, I'll come to the final question. What are your further plans? Are you currently working on another book, or do you plan to get actively involved with any other civil society or movement?
Gosh, so I'm still, I haven't even launched my first book yet, but I am, this is interesting you said that. So I do have actually a children's book that I'm working on, which is very cultural actually after this one. So it's got nothing to do with Uma whatsoever, but it's cultural. And the reason that I'm working on that is because my kids approached me one day and a few months ago and said, and we were in the UK at the time, I was visiting my parents, my brother there, and they said, Mommy, we don't have a book. Can we have a book that talks about Assam? And I was looking around, I thought, oh my gosh, there isn't one. For their age, I'm a second generation Assamese, so they're a third generation Assamese. I'm like, what is there for second and third generation kids? There isn't one. So my next project is addressing my kids' question to me. Like, can I do something and bring them somehow in a simplistic way to their roots without, the big textbooks, but in a way that is told in a Western way, but is 100% about the East and have that connection with the West and the East. So that's my next book project. in terms of joining other societies. So one thing I do is I volunteer a lot of my time outside the work I do with UMA. I do volunteer my time a lot to help communities and societies around the world, very much so in the US, but also around the world as well. So I will continue to do that. I see myself as a global citizen. I am a member of the world. I don't even associate with one country or another as such. I am from everywhere. And because of that, I love giving and seeing where I can help with other initiatives around the world.
That was great. And coming to the book again, that's a very great initiative. Sounds and I think so that's not just for the children, because again, as adults, as adolescents, sometimes we need to understand a few things lucidly, and surely that would be a great project. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted. Thanks.
That would be an honor. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out some time from your busy schedule and joining us today. It was absolutely an interview. It was absolutely an honor to interview you, and I look forward to I absolutely look forward to reading your book, and I would be more than happy to have a review of that. And best of luck for all your upcoming projects and your plans for UMA. And best of luck to Democracy Without Borders as well.
Omkaar, thank you so much. It really was, all the pleasure was mine, and such an honor to be here as well. Thank you.
With that, I would request all the viewers to share their opinions on the interview. If they have any further questions, we could maybe have that mail to Rita ma'am, and maybe we could have the answers to that later on. And apart from that, I would request you to subscribe to the official channel of the Global Federal League to stay updated with further such interviews. And I'll also be dropping in the YouTube links to UMA and Democracy Without Borders. You could check out their work. And at the end of the day, it's the support of the people, it's the support of our lovely audience that keeps us going. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day ahead.